What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Sports Medicine Broadcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Jackson, talking with Laura Manning about rural AT problems. So this one is sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/rural AT, rural. And I know that sometimes people say that differently or it sounds funny, but I'm pretty sure everybody knows what rural is. So just before we started, I was talking with Laura, and in her high school, she has about 500 total students. In my freshman class, we have about 800 students, somewhere around 800 students. And so whenever I do the mass CPR training, I'll train at least 500 freshman students in one day, like in 4 or 5 hours, on how to do CPR. And that's Laura's whole school. So with being in a community that small, there are definitely some benefits and definitely some challenges. So we're going to hear from Laura. Again, sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/rural AT. But before we get started, Laura's going to tell you she's 12 years in as an athletic trainer, 10 years there working with Bellevue Hospital System in Bellevue, Ohio. But Laura, how did you get to where you are right now?
I actually grew up just 20 minutes down the road, so I just kind of ended up close to home. My husband's a Bellevue High School grad, so when the position came open, it was pretty good timing and a location for us. We both grew up in small towns, and the high school is really where I always wanted to be. The hours were more appealing to me. I like the close-knit community. Just felt more like home, and I was comfortable here. So got very lucky, and were offered an opportunity to come here, and kind of just have stayed ever since.
All right. Okay, so I had mentioned earlier you got 500 kids in your high school. So tell me a little bit more about like setting the scene. How close are you to the hospital, to an ER, to an orthopedic surgeon? So tell me, why is this rural?
Well, we're very actually close to our hospital. My high school is about 2 miles down the road from the hospital that I am employed through. But we're a very small independent hospital. When I say small, we have about 50 patient beds. So we have an ER right here, but we don't have necessarily an on-call ortho all the time. A lot of those resources we have to look elsewhere for. That presents a lot of issues. You know, you don't have somebody in your OR or in your ER that's going to see those fractures and acute, trauma cases that we see in athletics. So my kids will come here from the hospital. We'll bring them into the hospital, and then most of them, unfortunately, have to be then transferred to a larger facility. Sometimes they'll go by ambulance, sometimes they'll go by life flight, depending on the severity, but that's usually about an hour trip. So we're sending them either to Cleveland or Toledo, where they have an on-call ortho all the time. We unfortunately just don't have that with our small system here. So that presents a lot of challenges. My kids end up all over the place, and with orthos that I'm not familiar with or don't have a relationship with. So then the communication part definitely becomes more challenging, as I'm trying to reach out all over Northern Ohio to get a hold of physicians who are treating my athletes, and making sure we're staying on the same plan of care. So that's definitely challenging. We do have a couple of local orthos. They just don't do on-call hours, unfortunately. So that means usually nobody's here in the afternoons or late evenings, Saturday mornings, when we typically need them in an emergency case.
All right, so you do have orthopedics there in your community, in your hospital, but for the most part, when our stuff is happening, you're having to ship them off somewhere else. So you said your school is 2 minutes from the hospital, and now is there an ambulance service run out of the hospital?
We don't have an ambulance service run out of the hospital. We do have an independent EMS service here in town. They're actually closer to my high school. They're only 1 minute out. So our average response time is pretty fast. That five minutes or so, we usually can get an ambulance on site. So we're very blessed. They're full-time, 24-hour staffed with paramedics. When we start heading out a little bit outside of our city limits, then we end up with more of those volunteer EMS. And sometimes, we travel to away schools, and those are those volunteer departments are what we use then at away games for traveling or transporting patients.
Okay, you had mentioned that you worked at an even smaller school before working there at Bellevue. Tell me a little bit about that scene.
The school I worked at before I came to Bellevue, Lakota, we only had about 250 kids in the whole high school. So even smaller classes, much less athletics, a variety of athletics just based on our population. But that is an even more rural school. It's actually not even in a town. It's literally in a cornfield, and the closest town is like 15 minutes. So there I definitely dealt a lot more with those volunteer EMTs transporting my kids. That was definitely a lot more challenging. You have kids from a wide geographical area, but just a small number of athletes to deal with. So a lot of those kids don't have family doctors, things like that, just based on there's not a lot in the area. So that obviously presents new challenges with, referring your kids to somebody. They don't always have that first step where we send a lot of those kids. So it was a lot of communicating with them and getting our team doc on board to see some of these kids they wouldn't usually, see, to help us out with those kind of things.
All right. You mentioned that if it's any sort of major thing or anything outside of what is normal for your not on-call orthopedics, you're going to have to send a kid like an hour each direction, either to Toledo or you said Ohio? No, Toledo
Cleveland.
or Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Ohio's a state. Come on. And so that, again, if I sent a student an hour, it was because we're here in Houston and the traffic is so bad. Because, if there's no traffic, it's a 20-minute drive to get to the doctor's office, a 20-minute drive to get to this doctor's office, 20-minute drive to get to the downtown, the medical center, which is, and one of the top 25 in the world here in Houston. And so for me, it's really crazy to see all that stuff or to hear just the differences. But tell me a little bit more about, you said there was a lot of challenges. You have to call across town to find out what doctor, what rehab you're supposed to be doing. You have parents that are, driving the kids, taking them to all these different places. So talk to me a little bit more about some of those challenges you face.
Well, it's definitely, I think your communication with your parents has to be top notch when you're in a situation like this. When we are sending those kids an hour away, they're definitely in a kind of a new experience for themselves too. Most of them are, unfortunately ending up in the healthcare system an hour away, due to a serious trauma, something they weren't expecting or planning for either. So I think a lot of times for me, it just really helps if, I just give that athlete's office, doctor's office a call and reach out to a nurse, try to get a hold of the ortho on the phone and say, hey, you're an hour away. We're not always going to be able to see you as frequently. What can I do as your middleman? How can I facilitate healing and rehab, if that be it, or make sure that we're getting the accommodations needed at school? You just have to be really, really good at communicating and not be afraid to, make those phone calls that are sometimes challenging and frustrating because you're being sent from this office to this office to this person to finally get a hold of somebody that's treated your athlete and knows firsthand what we're supposed to be doing on this end. It's obviously much easier if you work in a healthcare system where you can just reach out to the ortho that's employed by the same company or someone that you've used 100 times. But when you're reaching out to a guy who has no idea who you are and what services you can offer, sometimes that becomes challenging, trying to explain who you are, what you can do. And granted, we're a small facility at, my high school. My athletic training room is very small. I have to, explain to them what opportunities I can offer the athlete and really make sure they can see what kind of care we can provide. And if that's out of the scope that at the high school that we can't provide, then making sure either locally that ortho is getting them into a local PT that can reach out and take care of those things for us. Or unfortunately, if the parent has to keep driving the athlete far, can raise a bunch of challenges. But it definitely, you have to be willing to just make those phone calls all the time and make sure that you're on the same page with those doctors that don't know you and don't have a relationship with you.
One of the things you mentioned was being on top of communication with parents. Is there a certain tool that you like to use? I know there's like Dragonfly Max or where you can like text the parents, or there's some of the other injury treatment softwares. Is it best for you to like send a note home? How do you best handle that?
I usually just call the parent. Again, when you only have so many students, you have a lot more free time to give those parents a call. And honestly, being here as long as I have, I've had most of these kids older siblings. So being established, most of the families know me. Probably most of Bellevue High School has my phone number. So phone calls and texts are usually how I'm reaching out to most of the parents. And I'm lucky enough to be able to do that because I have such a small number of athletes. I certainly have the time to communicate better than, say, someone that has 800 students in one class that they're worrying about. So it definitely has its benefits that I have a small group of kids that I can really form those familial relationships with, because I'm here and they've known me for years. And certainly my phone number is out there and I take phone calls all the time. So that, I think that helps. Certainly can be frustrating at 8 o'clock at night when you're sitting down with your family to get a phone call. And sometimes I let those go to voicemail, call you back in the morning. But I think for the most part, the families know that I'm here for them, as much as I can be, and that I'll reach out to you if it's important. And then that can come back and they can always reach out back to me.
All right. For the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we've had a doctor on our sidelines at each of our varsity football games. What does that look like for you in a small town?
Well, I actually have a really great family doctor who is our team physician. He is at, I would say, well, definitely all of our home games. He's always at our home games. If the game, scheduling permits, then he'll come to away games with us. But for the most part, away games, I'm by myself. A lot of the schools we travel to will have a physician on their sideline, but I would say about 50% of the time for football games, I have a physician, a general practitioner on my sideline. But at other games, not really. Basketball or some of those other sports, it's just me.
Yeah, we really only have them at varsity football games, and usually it's only on one sideline or the other. So we don't have one that travels with us, but we have one that covers the home. But when you have 5 schools in one district playing at one stadium, you're only playing at two different locations. So either you have one there, or the other team away has one, because that's more or less how it works here in Houston. So all right, so I need to call the physical therapist and say, hey, can you come show me this, or how are you doing this with this athlete? So I just did that with one of my kids. The physical therapist came over, showed me how they're doing it. How does that work there for you?
Well, if it works for if they work for the Bellevue Hospital, we have a small physical therapy department here. We have 4 full-time PTs, 5 PTAs. If they're treating my athlete, which is the ideal situation, then I literally just walk down the stairs from my office here at the hospital when I'm here, and I visit with them. We problem solve, we chat face to face. If they're at another facility, then I usually just have to make a phone call to that PT and get a little direction. Sometimes that's an email or a phone call. We try to get most of our kids to come here simply for simplicity's sake. I'm familiar with those PTs. I've been working with them for 10 years too. So we all have a really great relationship. But if they're outside the system, then it is just a phone call to say, hey, what are you doing? How can I bridge the gap on those days that you're not seeing that patient?
All right. Some of the other things that might be a challenge for you in a small town may also be financial support, right? So here in the big city of Houston, Pasadena, I make a pretty good salary. We have, I would say, pretty good budgets. Our budget is somewhere around $6,000 for athletic training, and I've talked before with like Richard Davis about how they have like a $35,000 something like that budget because of fundraising and all that kind of stuff. So discuss some of the other doctor related challenges you face.
Well, budget, I definitely, I'm pretty lucky. My AD doesn't necessarily set a dollar cap, but I try really hard to limit the amount of supplies I use, simply because, finances run at the top of everybody's list in mind. So it is a lot of, sending up quotes and making sure that you're, getting those bid requests and making sure that you're getting the best deal from each company that you can. So sometimes that's a little more legwork, but it pays off, especially when you're squeezing things in. We have a really great Gridiron Foundation. So if there's a big object I need, a lot of times I can work through them to help provide us with some of those other, big purchases, capital purchases that aren't necessarily in my high school's budget. It kind of helps. Ohio is a big football state, and we have a really strong tradition in our football program. So I'm very lucky to have that organization, and they've helped me out a lot. So that's another great thing for our small town ATs to reach out and make connections with those organizations. I'm really familiar with the Gridiron Foundation, of their chair and their committee. So it's good to make those connections, because those are going to, help you find resources that your school might not be able to offer you directly. But, if I ever need anything, I can give Jeff a call and say, hey, this is something I'm really interested. It's not currently fitting into our high school budget. Can we make this work on the private fundraising side of things? And they've definitely stepped up and helped me. So I think if, in a rural area, you have to kind of look a little, other places for money, other organizations. Your boosters certainly are going to be a great organization. So if you can meet those people and make friends with those people and let them really know what you need and why you need it, demonstrate that this is a really great thing, and a great service that the school is offering, but can't necessarily pick up the tab for all of it. It makes a really big difference, I think, in them, supporting you on the financially that the school can't do. And that's been a huge game changer for me, is, forming those relationships and them stepping up and helping me, provide better care and better services, just the way they can financially.
All right. So the Gridiron Foundation, we have a booster club here. I don't know what the Gridiron,
well, our Gridiron, it's separate from our booster club. They fundraise mostly for football. That's their big purpose. They're our big football supporters. So if it's something that is going to specifically, benefit the football players, then they're kind of the first go-to. We do have athletic boosters too, and their focus is on all of the sports together. But the Gridiron in this area has a pretty good following, just based on how much we all love football. So they're a good organization to reach out to.
All right, and you had also mentioned that you grew up in the area, but there's also your husband graduated from there, and so a lot of times in small towns, people will come back there, and so that they're really bought into the community, they're bought into the school, they're bought into the people who have been there doing a good job for a long time. So you tend to have a more active and supportive booster club and community and that type of thing, correct?
Absolutely. Our athletic boosters and our Gridiron are, I would say, probably 85% Bellevue High School alum, and that really have a strong commitment to our community, and have all, come back here and live here, because they really love our small town. I really love, the Friday night lights, and really love being a part of something. We're super blessed to have great community support. So that makes up for some of the other downfalls, or some of the other negatives, or, problems that I face being kind of by myself. I have good community support that, has really helped me stay focused and continue to buy into what we're doing here. That community rallying behind you and really supporting their athletes, not just, on the football field, but on, in their lives, makes a big difference. And I think it really has encouraged me to continue on in athletic training and stay here in this facility and, in this community, knowing that we're kind of all in this together, and they want what's best for the program too.
All right. So we've talked a little bit about some of the medical, some of the financial obstacles that you have to overcome. What are some of the other challenges of being a rural AT?
I think, and this has just always been one of my big pet peeves about continuing education. I go to these continuing education courses and I learn all this great stuff and I get really excited about it. And then I have a hard time bringing that home and implementing some of it into my daily practice, simply because I don't necessarily have the resources, whether it be financial or personnel wise. Our healthcare system, I'm the only athletic trainer. We only cover one high school. So I find myself a lot of times kind of in a little silo of athletic training. So I learn all these really great things, or I hear about other programs and these things that they're doing and able to provide for their athletes. And then I sit down and I'm thinking, how can I implement some of these things? And it's really frustrating sometimes. You don't necessarily have the opportunity to implement some of these big programs, that some of the other schools have. So that can be really frustrating at times to, you have to do the best you can with what you have. And as much as I want to give more and create more and build more for our students, sometimes you just have to take a step back and realize you're doing the best you can with what you have. So I find that to be frustrating sometimes after I take a great continuing ed course. I'm like, oh, I really want to implement some of these things that I've learned. And then you step back and say, well, I got to be really picky about what I do pick to implement and make it successful, because certainly on my own, you can't do it all.
All right, so that's a great deal there. If you're that far from a major city, do you have to go to Toledo or, no, I'm wanting to say Ohio again. Cleveland, Toledo or Cleveland to go to your CEU courses?
I do, yeah. Traditionally, I have to travel. Columbus, Ohio State is about 2 hours away from us. They have really great continuing ed courses, but certainly Toledo, Cleveland, Columbus. So we do have to do a lot of travel. I do a lot of my continuing ed online through the NATA. Great way to get a lot of those CEUs, especially those evidence-based, without having to do as much travel. I take advantage of as many of the free ones as I can, and the local stuff that does come up is nice too. But yeah, I do have to travel if I'm going to go, to a conference or a course.
All right. So you mentioned having trouble implementing those things. What are some of the things that you have done to make what you're learning at the CEU courses fit what you're doing in your small town?
The biggest thing is definitely that concussion, the concussion classes and updates and protocols and return to plays and all of those things. That's probably been one of the best things that I've really implemented. 10 years ago when I stepped into this role, there was no concussion protocol at my high school. There had never been an athletic trainer there. They didn't have anything in place. So, piece by piece, you take these classes and you stay abreast of the new research. And then I've had to take all of those things and create our own return to play and concussion policy and then really create buy-in. So I would say that's one of the biggest things. The continuing ed has been really great for me on concussions and the continual research that everybody's putting out, because that's really helped me stay ahead of what I need to be doing and successfully creating, a quality protocol that I'm really pleased with running my athletes through. And I really trust the process. But, again, with the travel, it's very difficult. I don't necessarily have a lot of concussion specialists in my area, so there is quite a bit of travel for those, neuropsychs and things like that. They're definitely a lot further away than I'd like them to be. So sometimes, we have to make adjustments and roll with what we have locally, depending on the athlete's situation and their parents' situation. But certainly pulling that together to make a good quality concussion protocol has really been beneficial.
All right, so you mentioned that your place is 2 minutes from the school. You're talking about the neuropsych, the concussion center. Is there somebody at your place that's trained in concussions? And then also, is there any other place that they would go besides the hospital to get cleared for a concussion?
We don't have any concussion specialists in the Bellevue Hospital Network. The closest one is in Sandusky, which is about 25 minutes away, depending on traffic. So not bad. We do have to reach out sometimes to other organizations to send our kids outside, because we don't have a concussion specialist in my network. I can't remember what else you asked me. I'm sorry.
So around here we have like Neighbors Emergency, 24-hour ER, Bayshore Emergency Room. We have all these different, like tons of doctors' offices and clinics, and lots of ERs will send a kid, okay, mild concussion, or you got a brain bruise and no concussion. I'm just trying to figure out like the medical scene there in your community, and then also what you have done to help keep them up to date on the CEU stuff as you're talking about your concussion protocol.
Well, so we have an ER, we have an urgent care too, with less hours. We currently don't let our athletes be cleared by the emergency room physician. They have to see their family doctor to get cleared, or a concussion specialist. We try to refer as many to a concussion specialist as we can, and they will make the drive. Some families are a little more resistant to doing that, and they really trust their family doctor and want to stay local. So they their family doctor is allowed to clear them based on our protocol, but no matter what, we run them through that, our return to play that we have in place. And when an athlete's going to go see their family doctor, I'll send documentation of, we do impact testing. I'll send them any documentation I have, and then the clearance form that they have to sign that requires, that outlines our return to play. So we try to keep the local doctors in the loop that way, even if they're not a concussion specialist, but this is what we've done. This is what the athlete's, functionally testing at, and this is what we're going to run them through before we let them go back to sport. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. No matter what the doctor says, we're going to run everybody through that return to play. So really, it's just making sure that those physicians, no matter whether they're seeing, concussion specialist or somebody smaller locally, a family doctor or something like that, then we're still saying, hey, this is where they're at. This is what they need to be, where they need to be at, and this is what they're going to do to get there. So again, it's just that continuous communication, making sure that all of the physicians that are treating this kid are on the same page. But yeah, we don't. If it warrants, then we'll send them to the ER, but we don't allow the ER to clear the kid, especially the day of visit. So if or the day of injury. So if you get injured, you can't go to the ER. You can go to the ER, but we don't allow them to clear you. From then, we send you to another physician, later to get fully cleared and then begin the return to play.
All right, you are married and you have a kid, correct?
I do, yeah. She's 7.
And you mentioned that you're the only AT employed by your hospital system. Now, here in Houston, in our district, there's 12 athletic trainers that work in our district. And so whenever I have to miss or something like that, there is somebody available to provide coverage. And obviously we're all a little overworked and it's busy and it's hard, especially for us, this spring season when there's games pretty much every night of the week. But there are people available to cover for me. How do you deal with that?
Well, for a long time, I just didn't take any time off. I did whatever I needed to do, cover everything. But definitely as you get a little older and your priorities shift a little bit, unfortunately, there isn't anybody to cover me. So I try to plan my vacations around school breaks, summer, the normal athletic trainer stuff. But if I need a day off, and we do have an event, unfortunately, we just forewarn the coaches, give them a heads up. You're going to be on your own tonight. And they're all familiar with, our emergency action plan. They're all first aid and CPR certified. They've all taken a concussion course. It's not the ideal situation. I would much rather have another athletic trainer come in and help me provide that coverage. But based on location and personnel, we just don't have that option. So I really do try to limit, the times that I need off. But when it comes down to it, at some point, you got to put your family first and take those days and know that, you've set up a good system around your school that somebody can step in and kind of facilitate things along when you're not there.
Yeah, because yesterday I saw my car had a flat tire, so the tire repair place wasn't open on Sundays. And so if I needed to take off today, I could have called my coworker and, hey, Bill, I got to get my car. But I live 4 miles away. I just ride my bike in, so I'm going to have to go take care of that tire today. And then, like you said, you have kids, your husband works there at the school as well, right?
No, actually, he does not. He's a machinist, so he works in a neighboring town, but I couldn't do it without him, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. You said a grad, and I just, for some reason, assumed I was thinking he was a coach. But yeah, so then I have 2 kids get sick in the middle of the night. If I need to, there's somebody there. But there is a big problem with people who are by themselves. They're thinking the school is going to burn down if they're not there. So speak again to them on that same thing. Just kind of, I guess, rephrase what you already said. Why is it important for you to set those plans up and take that time off?
Well, I know how they feel. I certainly, my many first years at Bellevue, I did feel like if I missed, that would be the day that we'd have a tib fib fracture and I wouldn't be there. But, at some point you just take a deep breath and you step back and you remember you've reviewed your emergency action plan with your coaches. They know what to do. They've taken the training. Everybody's familiar with how to contact EMS in an emergency. I think it's just really important that, even the day before I'm gone, I'll say something to the coaches again. Hey, I'm going to be gone. And, I'm going to be gone tomorrow. Remember maybe review your emergency action plan tonight that I gave you at the beginning of the season, so you know what you're supposed to do. Almost taking that medical time out the day before. But you have all those things in place so that you can trust the people that you work with. You've formed these relationships with them, and they know you can't be there every minute of every day. And I certainly don't think most expect you to be. And you've trained them, and you've worked together to create these quality systems. Your AD is, he's so important in implementing these things. Get him on board with you, making sure that, he knows you're going to be gone and that he can relay again to the coaches. You guys are all comfortable and familiar with those things, and most of the time we're all available by phone. So, you can always give me a call and I'll walk you through what I can, but just trust in the system that you've created. Have enough confidence in what you've done and the policies and procedures that you've put in place that you can trust your coaches to cover for you for 3 hours while you take care of your flat tire or a sick kid, or, take that much needed vacation day. You can't make your entire life revolve around your job.
All right. Now, small towns, at least here in Texas, can be very old school, set in their ways, resistant to change. And so with you being in a small town, how have you felt supported, or how have you gained support for what you're doing as an athletic trainer with the school administration?
Well, you definitely, when you come in, you got to start from the bottom and build that buy-in through, creating trust. Showing what you can do, I think, is the most important thing, and really keep pushing that the care you're providing has a purpose, that we have the evidence, that's backing up the practices that we're putting into place. And you have to be confident in what you're doing. If you show an old school football coach any weakness, they'll see that and take advantage of that. But if you go into every conversation or situation comfortable in what you're doing, confident in yourself and your skills, they're going to see that too, and they're going to buy into what you're providing. And it is definitely challenging. Like I said, when I came in, we'd never had an athletic trainer here 10 years ago. So my first few years, I definitely had to spend some time in the trenches and create that support from the bottom up. We've had the same football coach here for 25 years. He was very comfortable in his ways when I got here. So to step in and say, hey, these are the new things. These are the way we're going to go about handling injuries and concussions and, medical releases. Things are going to change, but I promise you, I'm always going to have your athlete's best interest in mind. And, I think so much of it is just being confident and making sure that all of your coaches, all of your administration know that everything you do is for a reason. And that, you're backing it up with your training and your experience, and you're always coming from a good place. And the more that you can put that out, that I'm really here for one reason, and that's to make sure these kids stay healthy, that people will appreciate that and buy into what you're selling.
All right. Do you have anything else? Any other challenges that come to the top of your head there?
I think it's really important. It's been a lifesaver for me. I'm by myself, but I've made friends with the athletic trainers in my area. They're not necessarily, they're not employed by my healthcare system, but, the high school 15 minutes down the road, their athletic trainer, I can reach out to her. She can reach out to me. We give each other support where, we don't necessarily have it in our current organization. So if you are a rural athletic trainer or in a small system where you don't have somebody, in the office next door, make those connections from people outside your system. Don't be afraid to reach out, and still you're all on the same team, even if you're not the same company, but you're all working toward the same goal. So that's been really helpful for me, that for a long time, I felt like I was I'm in this silo, I'm by myself, and it gets a little lonely. So I think it's really important that, when you're in a situation like this, that you reach out and you make those friendships professionally and personally. And, you look to those people to really help you, in difficult situations, or when you need bounce some ideas off of somebody. You can't do it alone, and you have to look for, those opportunities wherever they present themselves. So, on Friday night, when you meet that athletic trainer from your rival school, exchange business cards. I'm going to call you on Saturday morning if one of your athletes goes down. You're going to call me, the next basketball game my kids are at your place, but creating those relationships, network wide, outside of your network, I think is so important and really keeps you feel like you're a part of the athletic training community and not just, out there by yourself.
All right. If there was one thing you could wish for to be added to your sports medicine team or your sports medicine program, what would that be and why?
Oh, I'd probably take another athletic trainer in a heartbeat. It would be nice to have somebody to be able to step in and fill those days when I need it off. It'd also be nice to send somebody over to the baseball field when I'm at the softball field, to split some of those responsibilities. I'm hopping from space to space a lot since I'm by myself. So having one more set of hands on deck all the time would just be really beneficial.
That is actually part of the reason I went from my old school. I was teaching 2 science classes, and I came over here and I was teaching 4 science classes. But over there, I was by myself. Over here, I was one of 2 athletic trainers. And that far outweighs, even if I was teaching 6 classes here, it would be better than teaching 2 classes there by myself with all of that stuff. I think that is the number one thing that would draw me to a different job, would be if there was like 3 athletic trainers or 4. But I'm pretty content where I am here. So
go ahead.
All right. Anything else you got about small town rural AT challenges or benefits?
Just, make friends with everybody you can. I think is one of the best things you can do. You're going to see the same families for years and years. So, buy into your community and form relationships wherever you can.
Very good. Especially since in small towns, everybody knows everybody and is in everybody's business, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I got a lot of eyes watching my daughter now as she comes up through the school system, which is beneficial. So she might not think so, but I do.
Yeah. All right. For the call to action this week, I'm going to just remind you about Stat Packs. They got those really good emergency backpacks. So you can win one on sportsmedicinebroadcast.com if you're listening live. If you're listening when this is released later, then you'll have to just look for it next March when we do a giveaway again, and we'll go from there. So, Laura, if somebody wants to get a hold of you to maybe ask you some questions or find out how you do certain things in your small town, what's going to be the best way to get a hold of you?
Just go ahead and shoot me an email. It's lmanning@bellevuehospital.com.
All right. So lmanning@bellevuehospital.com, and then she can respond to you there.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think that is it. sportsmedicinebroadcast.com/rural AT. Laura Manning, my guest. Laura, I appreciate you jumping on the podcast, making time for everybody that's listening, sharing your wisdom, your experience. And then I look forward to meeting you sometime in person at NATA or something like that, and hearing from you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So for Jeremy, Laura, Sports Medicine Broadcast, that is a wrap.